November 7th, 2018, in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside of Seattle, everything appeared perfect. John and Rachel Walker seemed like the ideal couple. Successful, happy, the kind of people you'd admire in passing. But beneath their polished exterior, something darker was brewing. What had started as a playful escape from their routine would spiral into a dangerous obsession that neither of them could control. John, a 42-year-old investment banker, had always been driven by success. He had built a comfortable life with Rachel, a 38-year-old freelance graphic designer. They had everything: friends, a beautiful home, and a seemingly strong marriage. But after years together, the spark had faded. It wasn't that they didn't love each other. It was just that the excitement, well, it was missing. So one evening, after a few too many glasses of wine, John brought up the idea of spicing things up. Rachel hesitated at first. The thought of exploring fantasies with John seemed foreign, maybe even a little dangerous. But John was her husband, the man she trusted most in the world. What harm could come from it? Their experiments began innocently enough: role-playing, meeting up in secret as if they were strangers, renting hotel rooms to pretend like they were having an affair. It was thrilling at first, a way to rekindle the passion they thought they had lost. John felt alive again, and Rachel? Well, she was happy to see that spark in her husband's eyes. But soon, the lines between fantasy and reality began to blur. For John, the rush became addictive. He wanted more excitement, more risk, more control. Rachel tried to keep up, at first indulging his growing desires out of love. But slowly she began to feel something unsettling in the way John looked at her, the way he touched her. What was once playful now felt more like a game of control, one she wasn't sure she wanted to keep playing. Weeks turned into months, and their fantasies became more elaborate, more dangerous. Rachel found herself agreeing to things she wasn't comfortable with, just to please John. She convinced herself it was worth it. Anything to bring back the connection they once had. But deep down, she felt it. This wasn't about love anymore. John's obsession with their games was taking over, and she was losing control. By the time she realized how far things had gone, it was too late. The fantasies they had shared were now tearing them apart, and the danger that lurked beneath the surface, it was about to come crashing into their lives. By early 2019, the dynamics between John and Rachel had shifted drastically. What had once been a way to reconnect had spiraled into something far more sinister. For John, the fantasies had taken over his life. He wasn't just indulging in excitement anymore. He was consumed by it. His once charismatic, ambitious demeanor had given way to something darker, something more dangerous. Rachel could see it in his eyes. He had become possessive, controlling in ways she had never seen before. He would question her constantly, where she had been, who she had seen, why she was late coming home. At first, she thought it was just part of the fantasy, part of their game. But soon, she realized it wasn't just in their private moments. This was John now, every day, every hour. Rachel felt like she was suffocating, trapped in a relationship that had once made her feel alive, but now made her feel small. John's obsession with pushing boundaries had become dangerous. His fantasies were no longer exciting, they were terrifying. But how could she tell him to stop? Every time she hinted at her discomfort, John would brush it off, insisting that this was what they needed. "Don't you trust me?" he'd ask. Rachel began to doubt herself. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe she just needed to try harder. But as the weeks went on, the tension between them grew, and the cracks in their marriage deepened. She wanted to pull away, to go back to the way things were before the fantasies took over. But John wasn't about to let that happen. Then, one night in February, everything changed. John came home with a new idea, something Rachel had expected. He wanted to involve someone else. He had found a man online who shared their interests, and he wanted Rachel to meet him. Rachel's stomach turned. This wasn't what she had signed up for. The thought of bringing someone else into their relationship made her feel sick. She tried to back out, tried to tell John that this had gone too far, but John wouldn't listen. "This is what we need," he insisted. "This will bring us closer." Rachel didn't recognize the man standing in front of her anymore. This wasn't the man she had married. This was someone dangerous, someone obsessed. And as much as she wanted to run, she felt trapped. unsure of how to escape. The days following John's new proposal were filled with anxiety and dread. Rachel knew she couldn't go through with it. This wasn't the life she wanted, and she wasn't willing to cross that line. But how could she leave? John's grip on her was tighter than ever. He had become paranoid, always questioning her every move, and she knew that any attempt to pull away would only make things worse. Still, Rachel knew she couldn't stay. She needed to get out, and she needed to do it fast. She confided in her closest friend, Megan, who had seen the changes in Rachel over the past few months. Together, they came up with a plan. Rachel would pack a small bag, hide it in her car, and leave one morning while John was at work. She would go to Megan's house, then disappear to stay with family far away. But Rachel was terrified. She knew John better than anyone. He was smart, too smart. If he suspected she was trying to leave, it wouldn't be long before he found her. And then, she didn't know what he might do. The night before she planned to leave, Rachel felt sick with fear. She sat through dinner with John, trying to act normal, but her hands were shaking, her mind racing with the thought of escape. John was quieter than usual, his eyes studying her more closely than ever. Did he suspect something? Could he tell that she was about to leave? Rachel excused herself early, retreating to their bedroom while John stayed downstairs. She packed her bag in silence, her heart pounding with every movement. But just as she zipped it closed, she heard John's footsteps on the stairs. He entered the room, his eyes cold and calculating. "I know what you're doing," he said, his voice low and calm. Rachel froze, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to play dumb, but John wasn't fooled. "I've seen the messages. I know about your plan to leave." Rachel's blood ran cold. She had been careful, so careful, but John had always been one step ahead. Rachel's heart pounded as John's words echoed in her mind. He knew. He had found out about her plan, and now she had no choice but to act. She had to get out before things turned violent. But John wasn't finished. "You think you can just leave?" he hissed, stepping closer. "After everything we've been through? You belong to me, Rachel." Rachel felt sick to her stomach. The man standing in front of her wasn't her husband anymore. He was someone else, someone dangerous. She had to leave, and she had to do it now. In a burst of adrenaline, Rachel pushed past John and bolted for the door. She could hear him shouting behind her, his footsteps pounding after her, but she didn't stop. She ran down the stairs, grabbed her keys, and darted out the front door. John's voice was getting closer, but she didn't look back. She flung open her car door, threw her bag inside, and started the engine just as John reached the driveway. "Rachel!" he shouted. But she was already gone, speeding down the street, her heart racing, tears streaming down her face. Rachel drove for hours, her hands shaking, her mind spinning with fear. She had done it. She had escaped. But she knew it wasn't over. John wouldn't stop. He would come after her, and when he found her, things would only get worse. She had to stay ahead of him. She had to disappear. Rachel pulled into a rest stop, her body shaking with exhaustion. She had gotten away, but for how long? She sat there staring at the darkness outside, knowing that no matter how far she ran, John would find her. He always did. Rachel drove aimlessly, the city lights fading behind her as the darkness swallowed the road. Her heart hadn't stopped pounding since she fled from the house. She had managed to get away, but deep down, she knew it wouldn't last. John wouldn't let her go so easily. He was too obsessed, too determined. She kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see his headlights right behind her, chasing her down. Her plan had been to head straight for her friend Megan's house, but fear stopped her. What if John found her there? What if he tracked her movements and Megan ended up in danger too? No, she couldn't risk it. She couldn't drag anyone else into this nightmare. Instead, Rachel found herself pulling into the parking lot of a cheap motel just outside of town. The neon sign flickered in the night, casting an eerie glow over the empty lot. She parked her car in the corner, out of view from the main road. For now, this would have to do. She needed to hide, if only for the night. Inside, the room was as run down as she'd expected. The faint smell of mildew clung to the air, but she didn't care. She tossed her bag on the bed and collapsed into a chair, her body trembling from the adrenaline that still pulsed through her veins. She had escaped, but the danger wasn't over. John wouldn't stop until he found her. Sitting in the quiet room, Rachel's thoughts raced. How had it come to this? A few months ago, they were just a normal couple trying to spice up their relationship. Now, she was running for her life, hiding in a dingy motel, terrified of the man she had once loved. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. Rachel's stomach twisted as she reached for it. She knew it was a mistake to turn her phone back on, but she needed some connection to the outside world, even if just for a moment. The message was from Megan. "Rachel, call me. John's been asking about you." Her blood ran cold. If John had already been asking around, it meant he was close. Too close. She threw the phone onto the bed, panic setting in. He was hunting her. No matter how far she ran, he would always be just a step behind. Rachel knew she couldn't stay in one place for long. John would figure out where she was. He always did. And when he did, there would be no escape. With her heart racing and her mind clouded with fear, Rachel realized something. She wasn't just running from John. She was running from the past, from the woman she had become, trapped in his obsession. And no matter how far she ran, she wasn't sure if she could ever truly escape. Rachel had barely slept. The motel room felt like a prison, with every creak of the walls or gust of wind outside making her jump. She knew John was out there, searching, and the thought of him showing up at any moment kept her on edge. She had turned off her phone again, knowing that leaving it on for even a few minutes could lead John straight to her. But the isolation? It was suffocating. John, meanwhile, was growing more determined by the hour. His obsession with finding Rachel had overtaken him completely. This wasn't about love anymore. It was about control. He had started tracking her digital footprints, reaching out to friends, and charming everyone with the same story. Rachel had been acting strangely, and he was worried about her. Everyone who knew John trusted him. He was charming, always the calm, reasonable one. No one would suspect the real danger that lurked beneath his calm exterior. While Rachel lay awake in the dingy motel, John was getting closer. He had used his contacts to find out her last known location, and as he pieced together the clues, he grew more certain that Rachel was still nearby. The thrill of the chase was driving him now, his every thought consumed by finding her. He didn't see her as a person anymore, not as his wife or partner. She was something he had to possess, something he had to control. Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She sat by the window, peeking out through the thin curtains, but the parking lot was empty, save for a few scattered cars. She wondered how long she could keep this up, running from place to place, constantly looking over her shoulder. She felt trapped, not just by John, but by the fear that had gripped her entire being. The next morning, Rachel made the difficult decision to leave the motel before sunrise. She couldn't afford to stay in one place for too long. John was smart, and if he hadn't already tracked her down, it wouldn't be long before he did. As she packed her things and slipped out into the cold morning air, she couldn't help but feel like a hunted animal, always running, always trying to stay one step ahead. But Rachel didn't know how far John's obsession had driven him. Back at the house, John sat in front of his computer, scanning through messages, tracking her movements with an almost chilling calm. He knew he was getting closer. It was only a matter of time before he caught up to her. As Rachel drove down empty roads, her mind raced with thoughts of what might happen if John found her. She had seen the lengths he was willing to go, how far his obsession had pushed him. And now, no matter how fast she ran, she knew that the game of cat and mouse wouldn't end until one of them stopped for good. But Rachel had underestimated John. He wasn't just following her. He was waiting for the perfect moment, and when he found her, there would be no more running. Rachel's nerves were stretched thin. She had been driving for hours, her eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. Every time a car appeared behind her, her heart jumped, half expecting it to be John. The thought of him lurking somewhere close, hunting her down, made her hands shake as she gripped the wheel. Exhausted and desperate, Rachel pulled into a gas station on the outskirts of town. She needed a break, just a few minutes to clear her head and figure out her next move. She parked in the far corner of the lot, hoping to stay out of sight, and walked toward the convenience store. But as she approached the door, a familiar, chilling sensation washed over her, that feeling of being watched. She froze in place, her stomach twisting with dread. Slowly, she turned her head, scanning the parking lot. And then she saw him, John. He was standing at the edge of the lot, leaning casually against his car. His eyes locked on her. Rachel's heart dropped. She felt like a deer caught in the headlights. There he was, the man she had spent days trying to escape, the man who had once been her husband but was now something far more dangerous. He had found her, and there was no place left to run. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them was thick with tension. John's face was calm, too calm. He took a step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "Rachel," he called, his voice smooth, almost coaxing. "We need to talk." Rachel's instincts screamed at her to run, but her body felt frozen in place. John took another step, closing the distance between them, his voice soft but laced with a quiet menace. "You didn't think you could hide from me, did you?" Rachel's pulse quickened. She knew that if she didn't act now, she would never get another chance. Without another word, she turned and bolted back toward her car. She could hear John's footsteps behind her, fast and deliberate, but she didn't stop. She yanked open the car door, jumped inside, and slammed it shut just as John reached the handle. For a moment there was silence. Rachel's hands trembled on the steering wheel, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. John stood outside the car, his eyes dark and unreadable. He knocked on the window, his voice cold now. "Rachel, open the door." She shook her head, her mind racing. She couldn't let him in. She couldn't let him control her again. Suddenly, John's calm demeanor broke. He slammed his fist against the window, his face twisting with anger. "You can't run from me. You belong to me." Rachel's entire body shook with fear, but something deep inside her refused to give in. She slammed her foot on the gas, the tires screeching as she sped out of the lot, leaving John standing there, his figure growing smaller in the rearview mirror. But as Rachel drove into the night, her heart still pounding in her chest, she knew this wasn't the end. John wouldn't stop. His obsession was too deep, his need for control too strong. And as long as he was out there, she would never truly be free. Rachel's heart raced as she sped away from the gas station, John's figure disappearing into the darkness behind her. The tires screeched against the pavement, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had escaped again, but the danger still loomed. She knew John wouldn't stop. He never stopped. As the car sped down the highway, the eerie quiet of the road did nothing to ease the terror clawing at her chest. Her mind raced with thoughts of what would happen next. Would he find her again? Would this ever end? She couldn't keep running forever. Suddenly, her phone buzzed on the seat beside her. She hesitated before glancing down at the screen. It was another message from John. "You think you can get away from me? You belong to me, Rachel. This isn't over." Her blood ran cold. He was still playing his twisted game. Rachel's mind screamed to turn off the phone, to disconnect, but fear gripped her. What if this message wasn't just a threat? What if it was a warning? Rachel knew that this cat-and-mouse game could only end one way. She couldn't keep hiding forever. John had already proven he could find her wherever she went. She had to make a decision, and quickly, before it was too late. Her thoughts tumbled over each other, and before she even realized it, she was turning off the highway, heading toward a secluded spot she remembered. A remote, wooded area outside the city. A place where she could confront John on her own terms. This time, she wouldn't let him trap her. The drive felt endless, the tension building with each passing mile. By the time she pulled into the isolated clearing, the moonlight barely broke through the thick trees. She parked the car and sat there, the engine still running, her breath shaky. This was it, the final stand. It wasn't long before she saw headlights in the distance. John, her hands clenched around the steering wheel as she watched his car pull up beside hers. The door opened, and John stepped out, his expression calm, controlled, but with a dangerous gleam in his eyes. He had followed her, just as she knew he would. John took a step toward her car, his voice eerily soft. "Rachel, it's time to come home." But Rachel wasn't the same woman she had been when this nightmare started. Her fear had turned into something else, determination. She stepped out of the car, her body tense, her heart pounding. This time, she wouldn't let him control her. John's smile faltered when he saw the look in her eyes. "Rachel, you're making a mistake," he said, his voice still dripping with that false calm. "No," she whispered with her voice steady. In a final act of defiance, Rachel turned her back on John and got back into the car. As she sped away, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew that John would never have power over her again. While Rachel managed to escape John's deadly obsession, not all victims of control and abuse are as lucky. John's descent into obsession highlights a dangerous truth about toxic relationships. What starts as excitement or fantasy can easily spiral into something far more sinister. Obsession blurs the lines between love and control, and in John's case, his need to possess Rachel overtook every other part of his life, leading him down a path of destruction. If you or someone you know is in an abusive or controlling relationship, it's important to seek help. No one should have to live in fear. Thanks again for watching. If this story resonated with you, or you have thoughts to share, leave a comment below, and remember to like and subscribe for more stories that explore the dark corners of human nature.